那好，那我们8点半准时开始。大家好，非常高兴能有这个机会。
Okay, we will start on time. Good morning. It is my great pleasure to have this opportunity to moderate the breakout session on risk assessment for multiple chemicals hazards. Unfortunately, we are still impacted by the pandemic, so most of the speakers can only join us online to make the presentations. However, this year the agenda is very enriched, including body analysis, toxicity study, and also some modeling. So now let's start the first report. The first report speaker is Wen Sheng, the researcher from Hubei Provincial Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and his topic is effect of exposure to persistent organic pollutants on adverse health outcomes based on benchmark dose modeling. Okay. Let me see whether my slides are shared on the screen. Wait for a sec. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Li. Dear experts and colleagues, good morning. It's my great honor to introduce our work, and unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I cannot come to Shanghai in person. The topic for my presentation is the effect of exposure to persistent organic pollutants on adverse health outcomes based on benchmark dose modeling. POPs actually here is mainly based on the or polyfluoroalkyl. So poly and perfluoroalkyl substances are substances consisting of hydrophobic alkyl chain, and which is widely applied in industry, business, and also in the production of the daily materials. And because of its characteristics, for example, in the South Pole and the North Pole, and also even on the Himalayas, the volatile pollution is already widespread, and it has already become a global pollution issue, since it is persistent and can also be reproduced across the food chain. So with the existing study, we have found that besides environment, reptiles, and also in the water, we have all detected that substance, and also it can go through the drinking water, food, and also it can also be inhaled by the body. And in the human study, in the serum, plasma, and also in the urine and the breast milk, is nails and even hairs, the substance can be detected. So PFAS exposures and its adverse impact on health has drawn a lot of attention. So PFOS and its derivatives, and also PFOA, as well as its derivatives in 2019 and 2009 have been included in POST list and has also drawn a lot of attention as hot research topics. By animal study, we found that PFOS have systematic multi-organ toxicity such as hepatic, neurological, cardiovascular, thyroid, reproductive, and developmental, and usually accumulates in the liver and has hepatic toxicity. And PFOA and PFOS also have PPAR activation effect. So those compounds can disrupt the thyroid functions so as to have an adverse impact on reproductive and endocrine toxicity. And according to study, PFOS can also go through, can also affect the neurological development or neurotoxicity by impacting on the cell growth and differentiation, brain development, and synaptic formation and plasticity. And also it can result in adverse impact on fertility and pregnancy outcomes, which will lead to abortion. So that is about animal toxicity. So how about a human study? Scientists around the world have also made some research about the epidemiological studies in humans. So it is mainly about the relationship between PFAS and the health hazards. Starting from 2011, you can see this table has listed the different cohorts and the result of control studies. Take 2011, the Korean cohort study as an example. It is found that there is a negative correlation between PFOS and the PFOA and T4 concentration in the cord serum, a significant negative correlation between maternal serum PFOS and umbilical cord serum T3, and there was only 44 participants. And in 2016, in the US, Ohio, the cohort included over 30,000 people, and it was found that there was a positive correlation between PFOA and ALT. And in 2016, the China study found a negative correlation between PFAS and TT3 and FT3. In 2021, Italian cross-sectional study covering over 6,000 participants found that among adolescents, PFAS was significantly correlated with TC and LDLC. And in 2022, a study in Zhejiang, China also found that the concentration of serum PFOA was correlated with carcinoembryonic antigen, CEA, but not with the incidence of LC. So all those studies proved that the human PFOS exposure may cause human health damage, including effects on infant birth outcomes, total cholesterol, and ALT, etc. So to ensure the health of the human, EU and the US have deducted and developed the health guidance value. In 2018, the international organizations have developed health guidance values. The U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry developed separate minimum risk levels for 4 classes of compounds based on subchronic animal studies. Take PFOA, for example. It adopts the animal study and it considers the mice skeleton development effect and also have taken different differences as into consideration. And based on the animal model from novel to novel. So the coefficient is 10, and from animal to human, the uncertainty coefficient is 3. And as for human differentiation, the uncertainty coefficient is 10. So altogether, the uncertainty coefficient is 300. So the minimum PFOA is 3 ng per kilogram per day. And as for PFOS, it also uses a subchronic animal experiment. And also adopts the delayed eye and weight loss of cups opening in rats. And the MRL is 2 ng per kilogram per day. In 2018, EFSA evaluated the serum cholesterol and also other key ending points, such as post-vaccination effect, and has come up with a limit, which is 13 and 6 ng per kilogram per week. And in 2020, based on the 2018 research, EFSA, based on PFOS exposure and its relationship with the flu response, and take insensitive infant as a subject for study, and the uncertainty coefficient is 1, and come up with the TWI for 4 compounds, which is 4.4 ng per kilogram per week. So you can see that the health-based guidance value is decreasing across the world. So with the prohibition and also restriction and control of compounds and such compounds and the transfer or the shift of industrial chain. So now in the blood of Western population, the concentration of PFOS and P4A is decreasing. However, in China, PFAS concentration is still increasing in the blood. And because of the decline in the health-based guidance value, among the existing studies, the intake of PFAS has already exceeded the latest limit, so which means PFAS exposure risk in China is increasing. So as for the health risk for the Chinese people, we need to reevaluate, particularly in high exposure regions or sensitive population. So that's why in China, we have conducted the PFAS exposure and its relationship with human health and the relevant study on that, and come up with a benchmark dose for the Chinese population so as to deduct the health guidance value, and which can be a basis or reference for setting the limits in drinking water and other aspects. So that is the process for us to come up with the health guidance value, including the collection of data, the characteristics of the compounds, metabolic kinetics, and animal study, human study, as well as existing risk assessment data. And each our domestic cohort study has gained the benchmark dose relationship between PFAS and health exposure. So if it meets the benchmark dose method, we use the BFS software to calculate. So if the data cannot meet the requirement, then we use novel methodology for calculation so as to get the novel value. And then based on the dietary exposure and metabolic kinetics, we come up with the result, and then with uncertainty calculation, we gain the health guidance value. So this study has selected 3 regions, including Hubei, Shanghai, and Shandong, and centering PFAS exposure and its impact on human health. And the data comes from the 13th five-year plan program on dietary study. The data of Hubei and Shandong haven't been published yet. Take Hubei, for example. So this is the information about our cohort study, which is shown on the graph on the right side. It includes blood samples, breast milk, urine, and other biological samples, and also the inspection and testing of the physiological materials, and also the follow-up later on. This is the basic situation of the 3 cohorts, including the basic information of the cohorts, the number of participants, the age, BMI, the type of samples, and also the observed effect. As for Shanghai and Hubei, in Hubei, we collected the serum during pregnancy, while in Shanghai, the sample is full of blood, while in Shandong, the sample type is serum of adults. And as for outcomes, it includes birth outcome, thyroid functions, metabolic outcomes, including liver, kidney, and glucose, and also blood lipids. And the subjects or the participants include pregnant women and also the normal population. Because during pregnancy, the metabolism in human body will change, and also some other indicators, for example, the thyroid functions and also the cholesterol come from different sources. And in collecting the samples, Shanghai's health effect indicators come from cord blood, so it reflects the status of the fetus. And just now I mentioned the characteristic of PFAS exposure in different regions are also different or also varies. So in this study, in 3 different locations, we evaluated the PFAS exposure and its relationship with health effect. And we do not harmonize these 3 locations. And as for serum and cord blood PFAS, we have used a liquid extraction and liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry coupling. And as for the PFAS in breast milk, we have adopted a different method. So this is about Hubei cohort, about the pollutant exposure compared with overseas study. In Hubei, you can see that the levels of PFAS concentrations in the peripheral blood and breast milk during pregnancy were higher, and those in cord blood were lower in Hubei mothers. And in different areas, the exposure concentration level also varies. For example, in Shandong, it is mainly PFOA exposure, while in Hubei, it's PFOS exposure, while in Shanghai, PFOA, PFOS are all dominating.
In terms of some indicators, and we also monitored the related indicators in Hubei. And we found that the effect of exposure to PFAS during pregnancy may lead to a secretion of thyroid hormones in mothers, so as to cause the decrease of TT3, and it also has an effect on the liver function to decrease the ALB, and also it affects the renal function to increase the concentration of retinol binding protein. And for what happened in Shandong, we also analyzed the data, and we found the PFOA exposure may interfere with lipid metabolism, resulting in an increase in cholesterol and low density lipoprotein, LDL. Both PFOA and PFOS may interfere with thyroid metabolism and cause the increase of FT4. And in Shanghai, and we can see the exposure of PFOS lead to the thyroid hormones in fetus. But we know that the different PFAS has different effects on the thyroid hormones of fetus, and PFAS is actively correlated with TG and LDL-C. And this is the critical dose response in terms of the increased ALT in cereal. And we can see that the epidemiological and toxicological studies found that there was a positive correlation between PFOA and ALT. But the results of the relationship between PFOS and ALT were not consistent for liver enzymes other than ALT, such as GTT. Due to the limited information, we didn't got the correlation, and so therefore the increase of ALT is included in the estimation of health guidance value as a key effect index. But for cholesterol, the animal and human studies had similar discoveries. However, the animal studies showed that serum cholesterol levels decreased after exposure to PFOA and PFOS, but we know that the exposure level in animal studies was more than 1,000 times higher than that in human studies. And we also discovered the positive correlation. And so that's why we took cholesterol as an important indicator and included in the health guidance value. And the previous epidemiological studies have reported that increased PFAS exposure may increase hypothyroidism or increase the risk of thyroid disease in women. So that's why, and the thyroid hormone-related indicators, for example, TSH and FT4 were also included in the calculation of health guidance values. And we use EPA's BMDS software to calculate BMD and BMDL. And the key health effects were increased serum ALT level, increased serum cholesterol, and increased thyroid hormones TT3 and FT4. And you can find the curves we found. And we got the BMD and the BMDL for extrapolating the health guidance values. And during the studies in Shanghai, and we take TT3 as the endpoint, and we calculated the BMDL values. And we can see the BMD was 42.3 nanogram per mil, while the corresponding BMDL was 39.5 nanogram per mil. And we calculated for different targeting groups, and we calculated the health guidance values. And we would like to emphasize here, and because some epidemiological effect cannot lead to the health guidance values, and so we didn't calculate the values. And because we collected the individual data, and there were certain some uncertainty factors, so we didn't use the correction factors, and so we chose a UF value as 1. And we can see this is the estimation of our dietary exposure intake corresponding to POD. And for the pregnant women in Shanghai and Hubei, and we calculated the daily dietary exposure level of serum PFAS level reaching PMDL at the age of 30 was calculated as TVI. For ordinary adults in Shandong, the daily dietary exposure level of serum PFAS level reaching PMDL at the age of 50 was calculated as TDI. We also took advantage of the calculations from Professor Zhang in Shandong University. And here is a list of HBGV derivation, and we can see that the PFAS exposure and its correlation to PMDL, and we adopted the classic method and to estimate the based on the cross-sectional and the cohort study, and the related metabolism were considered as key health effects, and so as to calculate the health guidance values. And we can see this is the comparison. This is some values, and we can see that at least 50% of population and can avoid exposure and hazards, and through the health values. And there is some difference between Shanghai and Shandong in terms of the TT3 guidance values, and we should choose a more sensitive guidance values. But compared to the international level, we also made a comparison of PFAS health guidance values in different countries, and we can see that the health guidance values got derived from the cholesterol, and was 4.06, which is lower than the 13 given by EFSA in 2013. And the PFOA TWI is 6.79 and quite close to the 6 given by FTI in 2016. And the PFAS, the sum of PFAS, TWI, is 15.3, and so but what given by a EU was 4.4, and so we made a comparison of the data, and we reported on the derivation of the health guidance value of dietary exposure to PFAS, and we believe it is very practical to protect the population in China. However, the exposure levels and characteristics in different regions in China vary from each other, and we need more data to support the calculation of the health guidance values, and such values derived from us have been reviewed and recognized by the experts. And here are the documents to show their recognition, and they suggest us we submit the values to the national authorities for further review. And finally, acknowledgement and to my team members, and also many thanks to the National Key Research and Development Program of China. And special thanks should go to Professor Li Jingguang, the National Food Safety Risk Assessment Center, and also Professor He Gensheng from Fudan University. That's all from me. Thank you so much. Hello, Mr. Li. Mr. Li Jingguang, sorry, please unmute yourself. Oh, sorry. And but I noticed that the Mr. Zhou from Fudan University is on site, and I entrusted him to be the moderator in the venue, and so we still have some minutes, and we can take 1 to 2 questions. Any question from the audience on site? I'm Yang Hui, and I have a question. And I found the presentation quite interesting. And my question was that, did you try to compare to make a comparison between the in vitro and in vivo exposure levels, and is there any difference in the health guidance of values? And I mean that, and to make a comparison of the exposure level in vitro and in vivo exposure levels. And so I think the two methods can generate different health guidance values. And I think your values are based on the external exposure, but have you ever tried to make a comparison between in vitro and in vivo exposures? Okay, thank you. And due to the time limitation, and I didn't make it very clearly. And actually, our health guidance values came from the combination of in vitro and in vivo. And in vitro is based on the dietary studies, and in vivo, including the concentration in urine and serum. And because we have a large research team, and for example, the kinetic model was completed by Professor Zhang Yu from Zhejiang University, and multi-chamber models as well as the models from external exposure to intake was completed by Professor He Shensheng from Fudan University. And we also had some other work completed by different teams. And so we believe that in our study, the HGV is based on the combination of the in vitro and in vivo exposures together with the kinetic analysis. But so it's quite a comprehensive, as I have reported that including the testing of the serum, as well as of the food. And
okay, in the interest of time, we will start the second presentation. The next presentation, the next speaker is Mr. Yang Hui. He is the Associate Professor from China National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment. He's also my colleague, and his topic is related with phthalates. Okay, please start your presentation. Okay, I will share my screen. Good morning. I'm Yang Hui from China National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment. Thank you for your for the invitation from Mr. Li, so that I have the opportunity to share with you. Today, my topic is prediction of in vivo human hepatic lipid metabolic disruption upon combined exposure to phthalates by using a combined in vitro in silico approach. We know that there are many compounds in food chemicals which have various impact on the health. So how we can accurately identify and evaluate its health risks, that is a very important basis for food management. So generally speaking, as for the food chemicals hazards, we carry out we carry out toxicity study so as to identify the possible hazard, for example, acute toxicity, genotoxicity, chronic toxicity, and carcinogenicity, as well as some special organ toxicity, for example, hepatotoxicity and reproductive toxicity. And then based on that, we further describe the dose-response relationship and then extrapolate to TDI. And as for the chemical toxicity test, the traditional conventional method is very time-consuming, and particularly when it comes to combined exposure, the normal animal test cannot help identify the hazards in time. So we need a high sensitivity and high throughput hazard identification method, which is urgent need. In recent years, the progress of technology, particularly in life science, has also provided a new opportunity for toxicity test. In 2007, the NRC has pointed out that toxicity testing in the 21st century is a new system which includes the type of in vitro tests and short-term in vivo tests to evaluate perturbations on toxicity pathways. So you can see that this book, The Toxicity Test in the 21st Century, has also summarized the methodology and has also played a very important role in facilitating the toxicity testing in the 21st century. So what is the scientific basis for using in vitro test for hazard evaluation? It is based on our deep understanding of the toxicity pathways, the mode of action, at the organ level, and also the adverse outcome pathways for individuals and the groups. So from different biological levels, we can collect the scientific evidence so as to form a complete chain of evidence. And in this way, we can use the early molecular or cell level signals to predict the hazards on human body. Based on that philosophy, food toxicity is also faced with a transition from a traditional animal test to in vitro cell test. For example, in the EU, risk mentioned that there was a toxicological assessment based on human cell responses and a comprehensive mechanistic understanding of cause-consequence relationships of chemical adverse effects. In this way, we can also serve for food management in China. So today, I'd like to take salads as an example to show our work. So as for salads, pollution, contamination, I believe you're familiar with it. For example, the plastic and also microplastics in the ocean. So that has resulted in accumulation of salads in the water, and also packaging contamination may also migrate salads into food, or through environment or of grain or vegetable pollution. So it can go through the food chain, the body, then leading to health hazards. And salads is a very important contaminant. According to DHP, is a very widely used salad. So DHP can result in the hepatic toxicity in rodents, but there are limited study in human. So it is listed as 2B, which means a lack of scientific data on human. So there is a lack of evidence for hepatic exposure. So it's not as convenient as testing in the blood or urine. And also the species difference, and also a lack of activation mechanism. Now, as in the salads, health guidance value many uses, for example, the reproductive toxicity, and then convert it into DEHP unit, combined exposure, to evaluate the combined exposure of 4 main types of salads. But actually, there are other endpoints, for example, hepatic toxicity and endocrine toxicity still need to be further testified. So in our lab, we use macrophage as a carrier to study the lipid metabolism of salads. So first of all, I'd like to talk about macrophage. Macrophage actually is a very interesting type of cell. It is a very important component of the human immune system. It is widely spread in various organs. Some macrophages actually pre-exist in some organs, for example, in the liver, and some actually is differentiated from the single cell, for example, carcinal macrophage. And in the evolution of a macrophage in human, its original function actually is the host phagocytosis. For example, as shown on the pictures on the right side, it shows the bacterial invasion of a host phagocytosis. And there is another important feature of a macrophage, which is it has strong plasticity. So which means in different organisms, it can differentiate different subtypes in order to respond to different stimulations. So as for DHP's exposure in liver, we can see that its expression in macrophage is obviously higher than that in the liver. So we knock out that gene in mice. So we found that the activation of specific PPAR receptors determines the hepatotoxic effects of plasticizer, DHP. And based on that, we have also considered receptor binding, gene expression, cellular metabolism, and the histopathological changes and organ phenotypes. So based on that, we have come up with an adverse outcome pathway model compared with conventional study. According to our research, we found that it has a more significant adverse impact on hepatic, on the liver. So we have also used MRI and other methods, and we found that DHP's metabolite can be effectively combined with alpha and gamma. And in the liver, NEHP's target cell, including liver and macrophage cells. So NEHP can act on PPAR and PPAR gamma so as to disrupt the liver metabolites. The two subtypes of macrophage decide the lipid homeostasis. And we also use human cells to further study and explore the mechanism of activation. And we found that in HEPT2 and macrophage, phthalates actually play different role or pathways. So these two types of cells on certain cell pathways have similarities. For example, the PPL effect. But actually, one is obviously more sensitive than the other. So based on EHP and its effect on the human body, we include TPRE into macrophage so as to further improve the concentration of carrier signals. And by linking key molecules in upstream and downstream, we have carried out a high content analysis of multiple targets. And then with those measures, we have established high content and high throughput hazard identification methods. And we applied that method into endocrine disruption screening in human body. And in a short period of time, we have completed the classification and grading of 3,000 chemicals and have screened 160 prioritized hazards. So besides DHP, other types of phthalates can inhibit the secondary differentiation of macrophage. And with high content analysis, we have also reviewed the lipid metabolism disruption effect or interference, metabolic interference. So we found that, for example, such as PAE with relatively complex chemical structure has stronger inhibition, but as for compounds with shorter chain, the inhibition is relatively weaker. And we further used a benchmark dose model for quantitative analysis and come up with the BMD and BMDL value. So you can see MEHP, MPCP, and MIMP have relatively high BMDL. And we have also come with a comparison analysis for validation. So you can see different populations. We have reviewed the lipid metabolic interference by individual exposure. And next we will consider that combined exposure. In HEPT2 hepatic study, we found that the combined exposure of phthalates has stronger interference than single phthalate in terms of lipid accumulation. And based on the dose curve, you can see that the combined exposure, you can see the difference in the exposure. And in the human macrophage, we have found that combined phthalates exposure has stronger inhibition of macrophage differentiation than single or exposure. So the combined exposure of phthalates has accumulated effect on the activation of certain cells. And in order to further simulate the characteristics of macrophage and hepatic cells. We are also considering co-culture high content model in order to further study the effect of combined exposure. And based on those in vitro models, we have gained toxicity data, and then based on that, we have built the CellX toxicity kinetics model so as to extrapolate the exposure in human body, as which is same as I mentioned in my topic. And now we have completed DHEP and major metabolites, MEHP, toxicokinetic model validation. And next, we're considering to use in vitro cultivation or in vitro culture so as to explore the interaction between the two, so as to establish a co-exposure model. And we hope to convert that into MEHP equivalents so that we can extrapolate in vitro data into in vivo data.
And now, let me make a summary. So the combined exposure of PAEs and the health effect and interference on human and needs to attract more attentions and to clearly describe the mechanism. And we need to establish or develop some high content, high throughput models to collect the in vitro data. And for example, and we are developing the 3D micro balls together with the hipper cells, and to study the phthalates and different plasticizers. And the key points to be addressed. There are two key points to be addressed. First, in vivo data, the internal PAEs exposure in multiple organs, and whether it will be affecting the extra correlation. And the second point is whether there would be some toxicokinetic interactions. And these are the key points we are going to address next steps. And finally, and many thanks to the funding and from the National Key R&D Program of China, and also acknowledgement to the members. Okay, so that's all from me today. And we still have some time, and I didn't make everything in details, and so I would like to pass the floor back to the moderator. Okay, thank you, Mr. Yang. And from the toxicity, Professor Yang has briefed about their recent research and also had a very good prospect for application of combined exposure to PAEs. So any question from the audience on-site? Yes, we have questions from the on-site audience. Good morning, Mr. Yang. I noticed that in your PowerPoint presentation, and you have a calculation of the molecule model, and it is a molecular kinetics mechanism. And do we use the Mascaro or Material Studio commercial software for calculations? And the PAE molecules and its a cell, it's an interaction between the enzymes and proteins. And what were your considerations of the molecular kinetics? Yes, you have a very clear question, but I'm sorry. And this work is done by another colleague from my laboratory. And actually, I'm not specialized in the modeling and methodologies you mentioned. And if you are interested in this, and please write me email. And sorry, I can't answer such professional questions. And Mr. Yang, I have a question, and I noticed that currently it is a framework study or a strategic study, and this methodology, the combined exposure, is it only targeting against some the compounds with similar structures? But if the compounds vary from each other a lot in terms of structure, can you adopt the same methodology? And yes, the structure is one of the affecting factor, but it's not the key factor. But what is the key is that for some the in vitro modeling incubation, whether it will influence the metabolism of other compounds, and no matter how, and as long as we can clearly identify the metabolic products or the rules of metabolism, and then we can achieve our goals. A structure and may influence the results a little bit. However, we can achieve that from the technology. Okay, that's all from me. Any other question? May I ask a question online? Hello, Professor Yang. I'm Liu Jiaying from Agriculture University of China. I found your research was quite interesting, and because of PAE and phthalates, and is not permanent organic contaminations, pollutants, and it's not easy to evaluate its toxicity because it fluctuates in human body. And because my work is about the metabolic evaluation, and so in terms of the toxicity evaluation, and I don't know what's the exposure cycle, and have you simulated the real world and in the human body, and because it is in the cells, and whether you can simulate the short-term fluctuating exposure in the human cells, and is there anything any different results? I think I found it quite interesting. Okay, thank you for your question. I get it. And firstly, and I would like to introduce our strategy in studying the phthalates, and normally, and we have two methods. The first, the in vitro cellular model. Second, and the in vivo animal model targeting verification. And we didn't exceed 72 hours during the in vitro testing, but because we chose the reproductive cell lines. So from technology and biological characteristics, we cannot adopt a long time culture. So we control the time within 72 hours. But for molecular modifications, and firstly, and we draw a time effect curve and to discover the rule, and then to decide to determine the exposure. And normally we simulate the low concentration exposure, lower than 100 mmol. But for the real exposure in human body, there may be some difference, but with the feasible technology, and we have targeting validation in animal testing, and the exposure takes at least 28 days, and to validate the key modifications in our cellular models, and to clearly interpret the metabolic rules and in animal testing. And we had a key discovery. As I mentioned in my presentation, we discovered that, and in some targeting issues, the exposure level and especially the metabolic product level, as the level we monitored from the serum and the urine, and what is our next step, the key priority for next steps. So what kind of methodologies are more matched for validation? And we try to get close and to the targeting tissues instead of the serum, but it is a test under the low level exposure. Okay, thank you for your answer. We have another question from our offline audience. Good morning, Professor Yang, and I'm from Mars. I'm Shanghai, and I'm not I'm not an expert in toxicity, but it's just a scientific question. And what's the Chinese name of the QVIVE? Is it a common model for toxicity study, but it is a specific model you set up for your project? QVIVE is quantitative in vitro to in vivo extrapolation, and it is the this is the is a Chinese name, and this is not specifically proposed for our project, but internationally. Maybe it is not a very cutting edge, but it is a new toxicity study methodology, and its main function is to be combined with the TTE model. And I suggest you to follow the section Mr. Jia Xudong's presentation in section G. And I believe you will have a clearer mind and a better understanding of QIVIE. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you. And I have a question. And I noticed in your presentation that for the toxicokinetic PPA model, and the DFB is a poly monobatalic product. And have you ever considered that such metabolic products diffuse in the blood? So what's the trajectory of the diffuse? Have you ever considered about that? It's a good question, but not only for the in vitro metabolism. And I noticed that the effect aroused by the plasticizer, so in the PBTK model, and we also tried to simulate the diffusion in the organs like in the liver, and we try to figure out the rules of diffusion, but we are discussing that whether such rules of diffusion is meaningful under low concentration exposure. But for the whether there is a big impact in long-term low dose exposure, and if you are interested, we can discuss together in the future. Okay, thank you for your answer. And because under the leadership of Professor Li Jingguang, I'm responsible for DHP DV model. And we are considering about the MEHP diffusion. And I hope, and through your animal testing, we can further validate the accuracy of our model. And we have set up the model. Okay, thank you very much. And under the guidance of Mr. Li Jingguang, and we can have more innovations. Okay, thank you very much. I think Professor Yang's presentation has attracted a lot of attention and interest, and we look forward to more cooperation after the meeting. Okay, that's all about the second presentation. Now let's welcome Liu Jiaying, Associate Professor from Department of Nutrition and Health of China Agricultural University. And her presentation is the serum concentrations of emerging and legacy polyfluoroalkyl substances in relation to thyroid function and liquid. Okay.
Hey, dear colleagues and experts, good morning. I'm Liu Jiaying from the China Agricultural University. Actually, we are a young research team, and our research is mainly about the exposure of contaminants to and its health hazard. In recent years, we have been focusing on the persistent contaminants such as PFOS and PFOA. And today, I will talk about some risk assessment and environmental epidemiological study. So PFOS and PFOA were widely used in industrial and commercial products, and PFAS are highly persistent. And it is widely used in packaging materials, cleaning agents, and also fire agents. Now, actually, those widely used PFAS are not so toxic, but its half-life can be as long as 10 years or even over 10 years. And we know that toxicity is related with dose. So in terms of environmental health, these substances have drawn a lot of attention. In 2009, the Stockholm Convention has included PFOS, its salts, and the PFOS-F in Annex B. And in 2019, it includes PFOA and related compounds in Annex A for strict control and management. Now it is now PFH XS is also under proposal to include in the convention. In 1998, 3M, the largest fluoro compound manufacturer in the US, already stopped to produce PFOS and PFOA, those traditional polyfluoroalkyl substances. And in 2002, the US has already stopped such production. And in 2015, PA in the US has also gradually improved the restriction laws and regulations, but the market still has great demand on those substances. So the production of such substances actually have been shifted to other countries. For example, in China, from 2004 to 2006, in China, the PFOS production has increased by 3 times. So besides those traditional polyfluoroalkyl substances, some new types of such substances have also been produced. For example, PFHS is mainly produced in China, and actually it is safety still needs more attention. And EPA has an overview of relevant toxicity study and calculates the safety limit. And as for adults, the most obvious effect indicator is serum lipids and thyroid hormone. And now the toxicity study is mainly based on traditional polyfluoroalkyl substances, not so much attention on emerging substances. In 2007, based on a national breast milk study for 12 provinces and municipalities, we have carried out a PFAS study. We have set up 2 sampling points in urban and rural areas, and in each area we collect around 50 breast milk samples to test the PFAS exposure, and that such exposure is very, very different in different areas. Exposure in Shanghai is far higher than other areas, and also several times higher than that in Japan and the US and other countries. So from this graph, you can see that the high exposure is mainly PFOA. Well, as for PFAS, Liaoning has the highest exposure. In the same period of time, we have also carried out the total dietary analysis, and we found that in Shanghai, PFOA exposure is obviously higher than other regions. So food is deemed as a main source for such exposure. And we analyzed the structure of diet, and we found that in Shanghai, the PFOS percentage is higher than PFOA, which is not aligned with the result in breast milk. So we assume that PFOA may have very strong blood-breast transmission. And we have also tested the concentration of PFOA in blood and the breast milk, and we found that PFOA has very high blood to milk transmission rate. In 2011, we have conducted another total dietary analysis, and by comparing the result of the 2 researches, we found that in the 5 to 6 years in between, the regional difference of PFOA and PFOS has changed. For example, in Shanghai, the exposure has decreased, while in the surrounding areas, the exposure has increased. And we analyzed the concentration of per polyfluoroalkyl substances. We found that in animals it is decreased, but by different category of food, we found that in the concentration of PFOA and PFOS has increased in aquatic products. And in 2005, it accounts for 63%. And in 2013, the percentage has increased to 71%. In 2017, we have conducted another national breast milk analysis, and we have expanded the sampling points to 24 provinces and cities. And in coastal areas in eastern China, the PFOA and PFOS exposure is higher than inland areas. And we also compare the PFOA and PFOS result with other countries in the same period of time. And we found that in different countries, these 2 substances also have different percentages. For example, in countries where there is a high PFOA, for example, China, South Korea, and Spain, the total exposure in these countries is also high, while in Europe and the US, for example, and also Canada, the PFOS percentage is higher than that of PFOA. By comparing the breast milk study across 10 years, the 2 types of study across 10 years, we found that Shanghai and Liaoning, which had relatively high exposure in 2007, and so we can see an obvious decrease in the concentration of PFOA exposure of PFOS and PFOA in 10 years, particularly, for example, in Shanghai, it has decreased by over 50%. But in But we have expanded the sampling points from 12 provinces to 24 provinces and cities. And we have also included Shandong in this latest study. And our finding is that the highest exposure is no longer in the Yangtze River Delta, but in Lanzhou Bay in Shandong province, which is obviously higher than other places. And also we have identified relatively high exposure in Mongolia. And based on the breast milk study of 2007, we have evaluated calculation on mothers and newborn babies, and we convert the concentration in breast milk to blood and then compare it with the limits of EPA. And as for children or babies, we calculate the intake from breast milk and then compare it with TDI. And we found that in the Shandong samples, PFOA HQ is 5.2. So which means it is nearly 5 times higher than the safety limit. While in Hubei, the mother's PFOS HQ is 1.5, which means it's 1.5 times of the safety limit. And by calculating the children's intake, as for PFOA, 100% EDI is higher than the TDI, while OS, 85% is higher. But I want to say that the TDI we adopted is not for newborn babies, it is for children. So maybe our assessment may have overestimated the risk, but whatever, it is still higher than the existing TDI, which indicates that in China, the PFOA and PFOS has high exposure risks. And we also analyzed the breast milk analysis in 2017, the latest one, and we have also included emerging substances, and we have compared the conventional and emerging substances. From the graph on the right side, you can see, as I mentioned, for example, in Shandong and in Mongolia, there are also high exposures, which are mainly PFOA. But in traditionally high exposure areas, such as the Yangtze River Delta, Jiangsu, Shanghai, and Zhejiang provinces, you can see that the emerging substances, for example, PFESA percentage is high, obviously higher than that in other regions. And let's review the 2007 study. Back then, the PFOA percentage was obviously higher than other types of substances. So maybe in Shandong and in Mongolia, it still uses relatively conventional process in producing the substances, while in the Yangtze River Delta, there is increasing use of the substitutes. As for Shandong's high PFOA exposure, we have also paid a lot of attention. So we think it is worthwhile for further study, particularly the exposure risk to conventional herb polyfluoroalkyl substances. So in the Lanzhou Bay, Shouguang, we have recruited 161 adults. Shouguang is located in a very important chemical manufacturing base in Shandong, and we test the PFOA and PFOS level in the blood, lipid, and thyroid hormones, and have also collected some personal data of the subjects. And the blood test result corresponds to that in breast milk. So PFOA's concentration is far higher than other substances, and we found a difference from other areas, which is PFBA, which is a short chain substance. So PFBA concentration was the second highest than PFOA, which is higher than NA and DA. In the past, the tension on the short chain substance actually was not that high because its half-life is shorter. And so now actually it is there are wider use of those short chain substances. So we believe that in those areas, more attention should also be paid to those short chain compounds or substances. As for the serum PFOA in Shandong, we have compared that with other reports in the literature and also compared that to the industrial developed areas in the US and other areas, and we can see that the serum PFOA in Shandong is very high. It is higher than that in the US and Sweden, where there is specific pollution incidents. And we compare that with EPA reference dose in adults. The most sensitive indicator raised by EPA is TC, the increased TC. And based on that comparison, the intake of all the subjects are higher than that. And as for thyroid, 8.7% of the subjects are higher than have higher TSH limits. At the same time, we have also used epidemiological study to carry out correlation analysis, and we found that PFOA has higher are positively correlated with DC. In TC, with correlation analysis, we found that the substitute has positive correlation with high density lipid protein, and we have also carried out correlation analysis with thyroid functions. So as for PFOA, there is no significant correlation, but as for long chain, for example, NADA and OS, you can see positive correlation with free T4, while short chain PFBA has positive correlation with total T3.
And Wensheng, when introduced, made the presentation, and we know that it's a combined exposure for PFAS, and we can not only focus on a single contamination, and so we tried PCA analysis of PFAS, and we can see that the traditional and the emerging PFAS exposure characteristics can be divided into two groups, and one is the long chain PFOA, NADA, and the other group is the short chain organic compounds, and then we can see the PC1 and the PC2 refer to different kinds of PFAS pollutants, and we can see PC1 is positively correlated to free T4. And we can see OA, NADA, and OS are all positively related to free T4. And generally speaking, in Shandong and the Laizhou Bay region, and we discovered the high PFOA exposure. And no matter in terms of the risk analysis or the epidemiological research, and we found it was positively correlated to TC in general population, and exposure sources of short chain and emerging PFAS and should be attached more importance. Thank you. That's all from me. Okay, thank you, Professor Liu. Any question from the audience online and offline?
可以交流的，我们可以现在提出来。我们现在时间上还是比较充裕
And
的。
we still have plenty of time for Q&A. Any question from the on-site audience? And one question. Thank you, Professor Liu, and it's a wonderful presentation. And I would like to ask the PFOA concentration in serum in Shandong. So what's the cause behind it? So why the concentration is so high? The surrounding environment, and what kind of a medium, or from the dietary or food? Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. And actually, in this region, currently we haven't sampled the environment and dietary samples, but we review the related documents and literatures. And no matter in terms of the fresh water, seawater, or food samples, and we identify the high concentration PFAS. And based on our previous research to common people, the dietary exposure is the main reason for PFAS exposure, and it is quite matching with the high pollution and contamination and in the seawater food. And I think it is amplified through the food chain, which lead to the high exposure to PFAS among the population. This is our guess, and we need to further analyze. Any other question? Any other question from the audience online and offline? And I'm not sure whether the audience online can raise questions. I know the guest can raise questions. You can pay attention to the chat box. There's no question for now. Okay, and if there's no more questions, then let's move on to the tea break. And we are a little bit earlier than the agenda, and let's come back at 10:30. And we have three more presentations this morning. Thank you.